Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Writing a Book, the Fast Track to Introductions and Opportunities. My name is Eric Lee. I'm with the Association of Corporate Counsel. Please note that the views expressed during this program belong solely to the panelists, do not reflect the views of the Association of Corporate Counsel or the entities for whom the panelists are employed. And now, I'll turn it over to today's moderator, Tiffany Alexander, Associate Vice President, Editorial Strategy with the Association of Corporate Counsel. Tiff?
Thank you, Eric, and welcome again to Writing a Book, the Fast Track to Introductions and Opportunities. We are joined today with Deborah Hilton, ghostwriter, direct response copywriter, and marketing strategist, as well as Vita Richardson, ACC president and CEO, as well as first-time Amazon best-selling author of Take 6. Today, we're going to talk about the value of publishing a book. Where does a would-be first-time author even start? But before we get into what I'm sure will be a robust discussion, I wanted to ask you, Vita, about your experience as a first-time author, beginning with what motivated you to write Take 6.
Sure. Well, my experience has been 100% positive, even more so than I probably could have dreamed or imagined. And what motivated me to write the book is that as I talked about these principles, which used to be unfolded in different speeches and talks that I gave, especially to student populations and young professionals, people would sometimes run up to me afterwards and say, "Have you written this down? I couldn't jot it down quick enough." So that's where I started to think that having it in a book would be helpful, but I'd never thought of myself as an author. So it was a thought that would go in my head and fly out of it. And then I get busy with work. So it wasn't until I was interviewed and talked about these principles to a fantastic woman, an author named Rose Orr. And Rose encouraged me. She said, "You really should write a book. No, you really should write a book." And that validation from someone who was a professional author really put it in my head. And then I was just contacted out of the blue by Forbes about an author's program, and that's what made me listen, that encouragement from someone else.
Okay, great. And Deborah, give us a little bit of a background on what exactly is a ghostwriter and also how you found yourself to be in that role.
So a ghostwriter is somebody who writes behind the scenes for people who might be too busy to write a book, never have written a book before and not have the confidence to structure a book. It doesn't mean you can't write. It might just mean you don't have time or it's a bit of a challenge and you want somebody else to do it. Most of the time, a ghostwriter is totally behind the scenes. Vita invited me to write the foreword because she was so fascinated with what I was doing, which I think is part of her mentoring strategy. It's kind of like I learned the principles as I wrote the book.
I'm not so arrogant to think I could mentor Deborah, but
you certainly did. And look, that's true. As a ghostwriter, I'm fascinated by the people for whom I write books. I learn so much every time I do it. And Vita kept on asking me why I didn't write my own books, why I stuck to ghostwriting. And the reality is my life has been fascinating, but I can't tell most of the stories that I would like to tell. So I write other people's stories instead.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's jump right in and talk a little bit about the process. Many people can claim to be an expert in their field or of a particular subject, but what advice can you offer? And we'll start with you, Deborah, on, potential authors wondering what makes their experiences book worthy, or in other words, that they have a book inside of them that other people would even want to read.
The reality is there's a lot of people in the world and interest in you is probably bigger than you think, especially in these days of global connections where really you're only bounded by the networks that you can create. You're not bounded by who you can meet at networking things or in the course of your professional life. So do you have a book inside you? Do you have a story to tell? And are you able to tell it in a way that would help somebody else on the same journey? Reality is most people do have a book inside them. The challenge is getting it out.
Yeah.
So I would add to that to say that when we all think about the vastness, as Deborah was saying, of the networks that we have and who all those people know, collectively, it can make for an audience bigger than you might imagine. So it is really about what is authentic to you and what might you be able to share. And I believe with the pandemic, we've all become more curious about one another.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think, though, that writing a book can be a little daunting, right? Even if you are a subject matter expert and you know what the focus is going to be, now what? So Vida, take us back to day one, blank computer screen. What got words on the page?
So I'm going to share a little secret, which was such a joy. I never had a blank computer screen. I never had to face that because I have a ghostwriter. And before that, so the first process was when I was interested in considering this with Forbes, they sent a document, like a probing document, to help you think about what your book would consist of and who your audience might be and how you would approach that audience. But by working with an established organization, like someone who has experience working with authors like Forbes, they gave me something as an initial prompt. So I was able to use that to write enough to explain what I might be focusing on. And that was enough for them to then think about who they might partner me with as a ghostwriter. And so that's how I was introduced. They sent, I guess that they turned what I wrote into a book plan and then sent the book plan to potential ghostwriters. And then each of the 3 ghostwriters that was presented to me wrote something about how they thought their experience would translate well with mine and why we would make for a good partnership. And when I read Deborah's, I just wanted her. I remember I said to Forbes, I only want her. And it was her combination of international breadth, which I knew would connect with my audience. It was also just the way she presented herself. She just seemed like such an interesting person to be able to work with and learn from. So I remember saying, I only want Deborah, but they said, you gotta pick a backup because she may not want you in the interview. Because it is choosing one another. It's not just, she's talented. She can work with who she chooses. She doesn't just have to say yes. And so we had an interview and I felt convinced, and thank goodness she did too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Deborah, it sounds like you're obviously very supportive of Vida in her process. Can you give us a little bit more about how you do support authors in their creative process and offer some advice for others who are thinking about it, as well as just a little bit about, getting in touch with Forbes itself, if you wanted to go the route that Vida did as well.
So I don't always sometimes I'm working with authors who don't have a book plan. And so what I always tell people, if you're thinking about writing a book, don't sit down with a blank page. There is work that you need to pre-do. And that involves what I call the 3 Ps. Thinking about the purpose of your book. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to create new opportunities and get more visibility? Are you trying to teach somebody a process? Are you trying to get clients for your business? What is your goal? That's always, are you simply trying to get a message out there to people that will be helpful? So that's your purpose. The second P is the people. Who are you talking to? Because you always have, yes, everyone can use your message, but there's a specific group of people. Normally it's more about how they're thinking than who they are. So it's not about your straight demographics, gender, age, income, etc. It's about, are they open to change? Are they interested in growth? Are they trying to achieve a goal that you can help them achieve.
Mhm.
And the third one is persona. Who are you? Because your book needs to reflect you. As a ghostwriter, my goal is to kind of act as a conduit for your personality. So all of the books I write are different because they're all reflecting different target markets, different purposes, and different people. And when you write your own book, you need to have that goal. So you need to do some pre-work before you start even outlining your book and getting your thoughts on paper. In terms of contacting Forbes, Vita is probably a better person to say how she got in touch with them.
Yes, so I'll just say, because I don't want this to be a Forbes commercial, if anyone is interested, please reach out to me. You know where to find me, richardson@acc.com, and I will be happy to make introductions for you. But Forbes is not the only organization like this that offers first-time authors support.
Awesome. Okay. Well, you're past that blank screen, right? And we're writing the book. Suddenly that voice in your head, that voice of self-doubt starts to happen. What's your advice for combating the second guessing or intimidation that can come along with writing a book?
If I may, I'll jump in and say this because what's interesting about writing a book, especially with someone like a ghostwriter like Deborah, is that from July through February, every week, we had a standing, my Thursday evening, she's in Melbourne, Australia, so her Friday morning, we had a standing appointment, and I don't think we missed one. So between July and February, when the manuscript turns in, I'm feeling confident. You know, I'm talking to Deborah, she's writing, I'm sending, we're sending back and forth, we're having this collaborative process, and all of a sudden you turn it in and that stops. So first I went through withdrawal because, you know, it was also written during the pandemic. This was an appointment that I looked forward to, and all of a sudden it's turned in. And then I start having self-doubt, like all the things that maybe I should have said, or how are people going to perceive this? And everyone's going to hate it. And, oh gosh, isn't that going to be embarrassing? So I remember saying in a panic to Deborah, oh my gosh, I just feel like we need to rework, or, you know. And so she told me.
I said, this is normal. I don't think there's a single author whom I've worked with, and I've worked with some fairly high profile people who are used to speaking, and you can find their videos on YouTube. You know, they get hundreds and thousands of views. When they look at their book, even if it's their third, fourth book, suddenly their thoughts and their ideas are down on paper in black and white. And it feels so permanent. And it's like, what if I misspoke? What if I offended somebody? What if in 10 years' time, the thought police come after me? I think that's normal. I also think it's a risk you need to take, both for the opportunities you create and also for the people you help. You know, I don't think we help anybody by all having the same opinion.
Yeah.
So I guess the real thing is everybody experiences it. There's very few people who don't have some deep down fear and uncertainty.
And I would say that that's even a topic that I talked about in the book, the concept of the habit of taking risk. And it is an acknowledgement that when you have butterflies in your stomach and you feel nervous, it's really just a function of caring.
Okay. And the discussion so far has offered some insight into why working with a ghostwriter can be beneficial, especially for a first-time author. Deborah, can you outline a bit more specifically how working with someone like you can affect the process? And Vita, can you offer an example of how Deborah's support contributed to your process as well as your overall success as an author?
So most ghostwriters are not subject experts. And in many cases, that's a good thing. you don't necessarily want the financial services subject expert. You want somebody who is willing to get into the subject enough, but if you get a subject expert, they probably already have some presuppositions, and that could get in the way of communicating your message. So as a ghostwriter, most of us are curious about other people's ideas and really trying to get into your head and learning your way of seeing it so that we can communicate that on your behalf. What I think Vita found with that was that she got asked some questions that weren't totally comfortable, and challenged to think of things from a different perspective. And that's something that a ghostwriter and many editors will bring to your work. Just that balance. Yes, you know how you think about it, but how are your readers going to see it?
Yes, and so I will share that probably had I not had someone who encouraged me differently and saw it differently, I would have tried to present in the book like with total confidence. And that's because I would be thinking, oh, I'm not a famous person. Why should someone listen? And so my inclination would be not to tell the stories of failure, because I would think that would give people a reason not to even want to listen to what I say. But Deborah convinced me otherwise. She's like, no, you have to be authentic. You have to tell those stories too, because if you don't, you won't be relatable. And you don't want your book to seem very formulaic. And so telling those stories of failure about yourself, or, she would probe, well, why did you do that? And so I had to be honest, so we had a relationship of trust, so I could be honest and share. And then she would say, well, you have to put that out there. You have to say why you failed. But then say also, how did you recover? That's the story that will resonate with people, because we all fail. And I probably would have presented in a very inauthentic sort of way had I not had someone who made me appreciate the value of doing it differently. And that's, I think, the experience of knowing what makes for a more compelling read.
Right.
I just read books. I never wrote one.
Right. Okay. So we're getting into some of the practical options for publishing your book and also promoting it, right? There's rarely one path to any destination, and I'm sure that is true for authorship as well. That said, Deborah, what are some of the options available to would-be authors, especially those who are interested in authoring a book like Take 6, those focused on career, professional growth, or a particular area of expertise? And if you do, go, what is the difference, I guess, between some of the professional, the more, not professional, the self-published routes that a lot of people go through, or using a publisher, that sort of thing? What is your, the difference between those options?
So to simplify, there are three primary options. One is your traditional publisher, Wiley, Penguin, whatever. Here's the deal. You may or may not get a contract with them. That contract will then, when you sign a contract, there are benefits, obviously credibility, published by Penguin or Hodder and Stoughton, that is a big thing. But you lose total control. They have control over your cover. They have control over your editing. They can take out, add in, insist on whatever, He who pays the piper calls the tune. So that's your traditional publisher. The other thing is that it's very difficult to get into that unless you have a massive platform, because they are looking to make money, and book publishing is hard to make money on. As an author, it takes you a long time to recoup that advance. When you go the Forbes or Hay House, one of the other publishing houses, you get a lot of additional help. Vita, for example, didn't have to worry about finding an editor. She didn't have to worry about her marketing agent, cover design, any of that. It was all part of the package. And that can be an enormous help. Plus, the marketing she's had from Forbes has been just phenomenal. The self-publishing route, however, can be very, very useful for a business or career opportunity because you actually don't need to be a bestseller of any kind to make an impact. You simply need to have a book that is effective for the purpose you've designed it and to be interesting for your target readers to read so that they actually read more than the 17%, which is the average. So self-publishing is a great way for many, many people to go. And it's certainly, once you've got it out there, it's more profitable in terms of books sold. But for the most part, a business book is not about book sales. It's about the additional benefits of it.
Yeah. But so I can definitely pick up and speak to that. So since publishing this book, the number of people who reach out to me just on LinkedIn has been amazing. You know, I've had CEOs of big companies reach out and say, I want to buy 1,500 of your books because I want everyone, they're doing it on Kindle because the employees are global, because I want everyone to read it. I had never, you know, I would never have expected that. Or, you know, I was invited by Xerox, their women's group, to speak at their global summit, which was virtual. And now they followed up to ask when they get together for the first time in person, will I come and do a workshop with them? I guess it's just blown my mind the positive benefits that you can. Everyone thinks I'm an authority on career development, even sometimes when I don't necessarily feel like the super authority that my book positions me as, because I'm still the same person with the same insecurities that I was before I wrote the book, but now I'm looked at as an authority. It made Amazon bestseller in strategic management, you know, months after it debuted. That was a big deal. It for me, and then the content I own. So that matters to me too, especially as COVID has taught us that nothing in life is promised, right? And you know, your security can go poof in an instant. But this intellectual property is something that's mine.
We've kind of talked about some of the benefits already of going this route. So I want to skip ahead a little bit to talking about promotion, because there's some other questions tied directly to this process coming into the chat that we can talk about at the end. But assuming that you have no large promotional budget tied to your publication or release, which is, I'm assuming, likely the case a lot when you are self-publishing a book or going this route. What are the steps or best practices for promotion?
Well, in my case, you know, apart from whatever Forbes may have done, a lot of the interest was self-generated just by posting it on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And people would say within my initial network who would congratulate or pass along, or people in their network would see it. So I just use LinkedIn. I haven't also used other forms of social media. It's not on Instagram. I don't tweet about it. It's just solely I'm focused on LinkedIn because it's a platform that I just feel comfortable with. And the pass along rate just through that has been pretty impressive. So you don't have to have all kinds of mad social media skills. I certainly can.
Right. And of course, we know you have with someone like Forbes, you have them helping with a lot of the promotion as well. Do you have any other suggestions for that, Deborah?
Yes, I do. Podcasts are a great way to get your book out there, and you'd be surprised at how many podcasters are keen to interview people on various topics. Mm-hmm. So not necessarily, your book isn't necessarily the focus. It may be the topic that you're specializing in. And so you look around for podcasts that people in your target market are listening to and reach out to them, develop a standard thing. Yes, you've got to do some work, but you knew that. You know,
Yeah.
everything is either time or it's money. You can pay to get it done for you, or you can invest some time strategically doing it yourself. It's like writing a book. Even when you use a ghostwriter, except in very rare circumstances, you have to put a fair amount of work in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true, wouldn't you say? Vita didn't just sit around because I'm trying to draw out her ideas, her thoughts. This is not my book. This is Vita's book that I happen to be the scribe.
Right. There were times even that, I would say nothing that I wrote found its way to the book without Deborah helping me improve upon it. So even if, there was something that, I think, for example, to when I was talking about the time in MCCA and really sitting down and taking stock of what to do because the organization is in an insolvent situation. Like that piece of it, I kind of prepared, but then Deborah enhanced. So we had this back and forth as well. And I think that every author needs someone outside of themselves to look at their book and offer commentary to make it better. Mm-hmm. How you go about finding that person, there are a variety of different ways to do so. Someone, might want to use their spouse or their partner as someone who reads and offers that critical perspective. You can just pay an editor solely for that purpose, to give you feedback. So a colleague, a friend, we can all look for someone, but I think that critical eye to kind of call you out, this is not good, you need to expand, I didn't get this, the message you were trying to convey, I think that's important.
Right.
I'd like to chip back in there because I think what you need to be careful, most people mute themselves. They when you're writing by yourself, like when Vita would give me stories, I would be drawing out what was her unique contribution to it, what was the different way she was thinking about it, and trying to amp that up. When we write it for ourselves, sometimes, we take out the interesting bits because we don't want to talk, we don't want to seem too self-centered.
Right.
And sometimes our friends and family will mute that even further, which is why picking your editor, picking your person, and maybe their feedback, you want to sit there and say, is this enhancing and amplifying the personality, or is it muting it? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Your personality is what makes your book different, so you don't want to mute it.
Yeah, I think that goes to, I saw a question come in about being concerned about losing your voice if you work with a ghostwriter. What you're saying is you're really taking a really good, big interest in what Vita really wants to say. That's a benefit of working with someone, and one of the things that you have to do as a ghostwriter working with an author, right?
Yeah, yes. And I'll also share an interesting approach with Deborah, and I presume that this is true of all of the authors that we work with, Deborah, but you ask for a lot of information on things that I've written. And I remember you saying, this has to be in your voice, not mine. And so I thought that's an interesting process too. Someone who's an experienced writer and who is a ghostwriter is able to customize to the voice of the subject. So I'm certain that if we were to read 3 other books that Deborah wrote, it wouldn't sound at all like mine in terms of tone and voice.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what you're paying for. You're paying for that level of professionalism.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about best practices when it comes to harnessing the great career benefits that can come from authoring a book. And we talked a little about promotion already. Writing a book is an expansion of your personal brand. And even if you aren't CEO, it can reflect on your current organization. Vita, did you have any concerns about authoring a book while occupying such a high value or highly visible position?
Yes, I did. And the biggest concern, first concern was I did not want to put as much effort into this book for the intellectual property to be owned by my employer. And in my role at ACC, I do have a contract that states that ACC owns me morning to night. I'm not allowed to moonlight, have another job. My intellectual property ideas are owned by ACC. So the first thing I wanted to do, and that I would encourage everyone, regardless of whether you have a contract or not, to have a conversation with your employer if you wish to write a book. And so mine consisted of, first, I report to the board, speaking with the board chair to kind of feel out was a she at the time, how was she thinking about that? And she was supportive, and I also had to make commitments regarding my time. So when I would write my book on my personal time. I would not be using ACC's time for that. That's why Deborah was perfect, because my evening is her morning.
Right.
And so you do have to negotiate that. I had to be very clear about what I was going to write about. We had to talk about, the general counsel of ACC was responsible for reading every chapter of the manuscript before it was turned in to make sure that it didn't, in ACC's view, as determined exclusively by her, portray ACC or anything associated with me in a bad light, a potentially bad light that could be damaging to ACC.
Right.
And ultimately, I knew that if something in my book went sideways, I needed to have insurance too. So I have literary insurance in case we went the step of everyone whose actual name is used in the book. I sent them a note, sent it to them in advance. I have the permission that they gave me to portray them the way that they are portrayed. So, it is a commitment on that side, making sure that you're doing all the things to safeguard both your employer's brand and your role with it, and your own personal liability too.
Right. Okay.
And ACC drew up a contract.
Okay.
It's what I could and could not do as I wrote this book. And
Yeah. Okay. And Deborah, is this typical, or what are some of the other things that would-be authors should be aware of when it does come to authoring a book while an employee of an organization?
Vita has obviously covered all the working for a legal association, and as a lawyer herself, I guess,
Right.
it's definitely dotting the I's and crossing the T's. But it is important as an employee at any level that you are not disclosing confidential proprietary information. You will get into trouble. You may get in trouble. The more successful your book is at achieving your purpose, the more trouble you're likely to get into.
Right.
That is not a good scenario. I don't think I've ever had any authors in that position, but you do need to make sure you've got the clarification and the permission, and also, obviously respecting what is your time and energy and what is your company's time and energy.
Okay. And how can becoming a published author actually benefit your organization? Maybe we could start with you, Vita, to answer that question.
Well, really cool. Some member companies, one in particular, the general counsel, was a part of the organization where I was presenting about my book. Even though I wasn't contacted through the GC's office, it's one of our very large law departments. And, so that was very positive. Also, being this book in particular, because of the platform that it has with Forbes, it's related to the business community. So some of the blogs that I have and would be able to do have to be on topics not related to the book, because it can't be like selling, but
right.
There are also opportunities to blog that puts ACC's name out there in the business community, and that can be positive as well. So ACC is an organization that supports career development. So with that, some of the chapters have invited me to speak. And so that's where it's kind of, it turns from being my personal to being
Professional.
ACC related, because it's a value that I can bring back to the various networks in our association. The upcoming one is by ACC Northeast chapter, so I'll just give them a plug.
Little plug. Nice. Okay. Deborah, anything to add to this topic?
Look, any visibility for your company that is positive is good. Also, if you own your own business, then obviously having a book enables you to attract the right clients, because you can sit there and say, well, have you read the book? Read that first before you talk to me. You know, your time is valuable, so is their time.
Mm-hmm.
A book is a wonderful way of getting to know a person. You know, when you read Take 6, you get to know Vita. So that builds her trust. You know, when somebody gets on the phone, even if she were to be doing consulting, they would trust her advice because they know where she's coming from. So I think that is also good for employees. If you have written a book, then your future employers know kind of more about who you are, how you think, and they may disagree with you, but do you really want to work for an organization where you know you're going to have values conflicts on a regular basis? So it's kind of a filtering mechanism as well.
Yeah. Okay. And
also, respect, that increases level of respect, just because the process of publishing is really daunting. So it demonstrates a level of commitment to yourself or to a topic that as an employer, you might project that someone would carry over into the role that they have in your organization too.
right. Okay. Well, I think I'll ask about 2 more questions before we go to the Q&A over here, because we're generating some really good questions and discussion. But I did wonder, Deborah, if you have one piece of advice that you offer to all of your authors, no matter what they're writing on, what topic they're writing on.
Know what you want to achieve and know who you are writing to, and never be boring.
That's good. That's good advice in general, right? And Vito, what has been the most surprising part of this entire process for you of writing the book and getting it published and becoming a #1 best-selling author? What's been the most surprising part of all of it?
Honestly, being a #1 best-selling author, I never would have claimed that, but I did have faith in the content of the book, but that was probably the biggest surprise. And I would say that it felt really risky. It felt like one of the personally most risky things I've ever done. And by doing it, it's now caused me to see possibilities for myself that before I wouldn't even have been thinking about.
Right.
And the more advanced you get in your career, sometimes the more narrower you think the possibilities might be.
Right.
So that was a delight, to open up possibilities and to be seen in ways that others may not have seen me before.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, I want to go back to Deborah. At the beginning, you gave 3 Ps. Can you repeat those for the audience again?
Purpose, people, the people you're targeting, and personality, persona, who you are, and you're getting your voice across.
That brand, right?
Yeah.
There's some questions about specific topics or nonfiction versus professional development or books like Vito wrote. Do you have advice? Is there anything different that authors should be thinking about if they're looking to publish nonfiction versus something that is in the realm of professional development?
Really, either one. No, it does come back to what is your goal, because your goal will drive the kind of book that you want to write. a lot of business books are written as allegories these days. There's a couple of very popular ones like Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist and The Goal. You need to be very careful with that, and because that can you can lose your message in it.
Okay. And there are questions coming in of cost. What is the typical pricing or cost around using a ghostwriter versus using an editor, using a research assistant? What are some of the other ways that people go about writing these books with help? Do we have any advice or information about the costs perhaps associated with doing so?
Well, I can speak to that because there are, I don't think Forbes is unusual. They also have a book division when you don't get the Forbes imprint. So only 60 authors a year get selected by Forbes for the Forbes imprint. So if you aren't selected by it, then their other side of their company is called Advantage. And Advantage publishes in the same way. You're working with the same people. It's just, the name that's on the cover of the book. And you scale what it is you want to buy from them. So you can just purchase editorial support. You can just purchase ghostwriting support. I went all in because I figured, this point in my career, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to just go all in. And so my range of support is a lot. So I have editing, design, they produce my website for me, they maintain so I pay them a fee to maintain my website for me. They pitch, there's a marketing team that's on, part of my package too, that pitches the media. When we move over to the blogging, I'll have support for the blogging too. I went all in. So everything you see has been outsourced. And so that's a very expensive proposition, but it's an investment that I chose to make in myself. But because of the way it's scaled, you could choose to have someone else do your website. And so that's the way you can sort of navigate your way through.
Okay. And Deborah, outside of, going the route of, say, a Forbes book, generally ballpark, what would someone be looking at if they were trying to hire an outside copy editor or hire a ghostwriter from any other organization that wasn't, is there a ballpark kind of figure for that, I wonder?
Yeah, there's a ballpark, but it's got a wide range.
Right.
So look, I would generally say if you're talking about a ghostwriter, anybody charging less than $15,000 is either just starting out or is not very good.
Okay.
They're cutting the corners. Now you could get somebody who is just establishing their reputation and they could be phenomenal and that would be great value. But, under that, depending on my NDA rate, I'm charging anything from $15,000 to $300,000.
That is a range. That is a range.
And I will say she's written 7 bestsellers.
Yeah.
Celebrities. So
yeah.
The top end is the people who kind of sit there and say, well, if you ever mention my name, I'll come and get your firstborn child.
Understood. Well, that kind of goes to kind of a question about pen names, or do you have any suggestions? If we are worried about writing something and your employer, not liking it or being seen in a negative light 10 years down the road, right? What are your thoughts when using a pen name, not using the name that you work under?
So I would be very mindful of the fact that in this day and age, it is extremely hard to stay totally anonymous. Now, I have a friend who is in a profession and she writes erotic fiction. under a pen name, and she keeps those absolutely dead separate. What you need to remember is that if you use a pen name, you kind of lose the credibility in your professional life. So you need to think again about the purpose of your book. Is it completely separate? And do you want to kind of split your life that way, or don't you? If not, you might sit there and say, okay, I don't want to split my life that way, therefore I will not write this book.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah. Okay.
Trying not to mention it, you know, if you want to write something that's particularly politically insensitive and you know is going to be career suicide, either be really careful on your anonymity or just don't write it.
Right. Okay. Going back to selecting an editor, I know that in the Forbes process, you can, there's a little bit more back and forth, et cetera. But what advice do you offer with selecting one and managing that relationship? You noted that if you do go through a traditional publishing house, they have a lot of say over your final output, but managing that relationship is obviously critical, right, to your final product. So what advice do you have for just managing that relationship?
So if you're managing an editor, and this applies to, I can see that there's some stuff on research assistants and other peripherals, Fiverr is a really good source for low cost, quite skilled people who are often like working professionally and they're supplementing their income, or they're doing something interesting on the side.
Right.
So that is a great resource. But what you need to know, whether it's design, whether it's editing, is here are the parameters that I'm asking for, and this is what I'm willing to, this is what it's worth to me. So for example, if it's editing, you sit there and the more clearly you can say, my target market is this, my persona is this, and often it'll be, I have specific ways that I want to say these things. Please don't mess with them, even though Words Grammar Checker is going to tell you that they're wrong. If you can say that, then you can train almost any decent editor. That editor becomes a third set of eyes. And you develop a relationship with the person. If you're writing several books or shorter books or articles, you develop a relationship with somebody. They know your style. They know how you want to do things, and that works really well. The thing about editors, and I think that Vita and I had a really great editor at Forbes, is that they have an ego, and often they are paid. It's kind of like, if my editor doesn't say anything, is that because I've done a great job or because they didn't care?
Right.
So it's having an editor whose ego is robust enough that they can stay out of it. They can sit there and say, you know what, I would write it differently, but that's good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's having the guts to stand up and say, yeah, you might say that's not correct, but this is how I want to say it.
Yeah. And I also want to add that, those who've worked with me have heard me say that I believe diversity is so important. And I felt that way with respect to the team that I assembled, or that assembled around me for this. Because I wanted my book to have more universal appeal, and I didn't want it to be cast as career advice for women of color, because I happen to be one. I also wanted a check to make sure that someone was reading my book who would say how it might resonate better with groups beyond women of color. And so Josh was white, male, straight. He was, in a demographic that would add diversity to our group. So he, helped offer thoughts on that too. Deborah is in Australia, right? And we might both be women, but we have a different experience. So having her offer perspectives as well was enhancing to the final product. So that's another thing that I want to point out for people who are looking to write a book, and you're thinking about who's going to edit it or who's going to offer you critical feedback. Really think outside yourself in terms of the people that you invite.
Okay. There is a question about constantly being challenged, editing your own work, right? Any advice? We talked about this a little bit, but getting out of your own way when you're in that editing stage of your book, of your writing.
So I think it's very important, whether it's your own book or whether you're writing for somebody else, that you have your outline and your story arc and you have your plan, and then you write that plan and you get that on. I call it a Franken draft. It's going to have more than you want. It's going to have less than you want in some places. It's going to be ugly in bits. But once you have something on the page that is a complete book, you can then cut, cull, enhance, amplify, mute, and play with it. But if you don't have anything, you don't have anything to work with. You don't even have anything to critique yourself. You certainly don't have anything to get a manuscript review on. Sometimes it's really helpful to get your manuscript out and then say, this is just a first draft. I call it a Franken draft. And can you please critique it and just tell me what's your point? It's still your manuscript. You can say, totally disagree with that. Wow, that's an important point. I'm glad I heard that. You can do what you like with the review, but you get some input.
Yeah. Okay. We talked about authoring blogs a little bit earlier about for promotion. There's a question about maybe starting a little bit smaller with a blog or authoring shorter pieces. Do we have any advice or platforms that are well received that our audience could look into, or advice on starting that way, starting a little bit smaller? Maybe the book isn't where you begin.
So Kindle also has, I think it's called Noval. They just recently changed the name, but they have like a short publishing format. And also on Kindle, you can publish any size book you like. So you can publish a 10,000 word book. On Kindle, you can use KDP Direct, and that will give you a paperback copy. I do suggest you make it thick enough to do a spine. You can do that with formatting. If you don't have enough words, you just have blank pages and large fonts. And it is quite a good way of doing it because you can do that by topic. Maybe somebody, say you were Vita, maybe somebody just wants to find out how they can take more risks in their career, or why they should take more risks, why they shouldn't keep following the safe path. That's very topical, and it's a much shorter format. Publishing a book these days, there are so many options, and it is so easy that there's almost no excuse not to.
Well, I will also offer that I had written, on my own, or even with ACC support, different things on career-related topics. So I want to remind everyone, especially those who are ACC members, that ACC offers the opportunity to publish through the ACC docket. And not all of them have to be, articles that are about heavy legal topics or substantive legal topics. The softer skills sorts of articles are very, very popular. You can write shorter pieces. They don't have to necessarily be the length of, the normal ACC docket article.
Yep.
Newsletter opportunities through our association, other professional associations and societies. So I think that everyone has a way to get or put their foot in the water to test out different topics and see how they're received. And certainly to develop the 6 habits and recommend them, gosh, that took years to kind of write a little bit here, a little bit here, and then it all sort of came together. And remember that all of this started because I used to talk to students and give them career advice. So I had speech notes that were a part of it too. So all of those little bits come together, and eventually you find your voice for something that might be a little bit more meaty.
Yeah. Well, I think we've done, not I think, I know we've had this a very robust, interesting discussion about the process, the different paths to becoming a first-time author. I know that there are questions about working with Forbes directly. At the top of the program session, Vita did mention that she is open to receiving emails from you all about specifics on that process as well. Deborah, do you have any additional information you would want to share with the panel? We'll also drop in chat in terms of the process of working with you, coaching, et cetera.
So I actually have just released a course on helping authors to structure their book so that they can then sit down and write flowing. And Eric has just very kindly put that in the chat.
Yes, yes. Perfect. Well, I do thank you. Oh, Vita, did you have anything else to add?
I was going to say that, as I understand it, it is like a coaching tool, like that someone can self-write.
Yes, it is. It is designed for people who want to write their own book and who are willing to do the work to do it. And it probes you through all the questions. It's kind of like a virtual me asking Vita questions. So you don't have necessarily the benefit of a third person asking you the questions, but you have the questions there. And I've got a pretty good, robust way of doing your own, what I call 360 view of your content. That you can self-promote, self-predict yourself.
Yeah. Okay, great. And of course, you can visit Take 6 Habits. I know there's some tools there as well for career development from Vita. So again, I thank you both. And I thank everyone who joined us for the great questions that we received during this session. But yeah, thank you both for this great discussion on becoming a first-time author.
Thank you.
Thank you
for joining us.
Yes.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everyone.